Turn with us back to the Old Testament book of Joshua chapter 3. Memorial Day is a time where we have set aside as a nation to remember those that have given their life and have died in the line of service. And it's been my prayer leading up to this weekend that this Memorial Day for our country would be a special Memorial Day, that we would see a unity that we've not seen in a long time in our country, that the divisions, political, cultural, and just the general disagreement that we have in our country would completely dissolve, and we would be united as a country in remembrance of those who have fought to give us the freedoms that we have, one of which we're expressing right now as we gather into this place to worship however we see fit. One of the things, though, that I am discovering as I get older is it's very easy to forget things. I've been a forgetful person anyway, but as I get older, it's easier to forget about things. And so I have to have notes, and I've got tons of Post-it notes. I have big Post-it notes. I have the little tiny, small Post-it notes. This is my favorite size Post-it note. But you can't put a lot on these, and so it requires lots of Post-it notes. And there are times, if you look at my computer, you would think that it was orange, the screen of my computer. But this weekend is a weekend of remembrance. And I hope and pray that we don't forget about why we have a Memorial Day weekend. And I want to do, in our time together this morning, I want to do something different and focus more on history than anything else, because I think it's very important for us as a church, as it is for us as a country. It would be easy for us to forget why we were attacked as a country on September 11th and why we went to war to protect our country. It would be easy for us to forget about our first Iraqi war over 20 years ago under our first President Bush. It would be easy for us to forget of why we entered into so many different wars: World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. It would be so easy for us to forget about why it was important for us, and there are all kinds of different political answers for some of those things. But the bottom line is that there are men and women that stood up when our country asked them to stand up. And this weekend is about remembering those men and women that stood up when they were called on by our country, and they gave and paid the ultimate price, which was laying down their life. And I believe it is so important that we take time to remember why we establish a day like this. In the Bible, God called upon His people to make a memorial for certain things so that they would not forget what they've come through in the past. And I think that in our country, the idea of memorials is one that's being torn down in our society today. It is important for us to make memorials so that we remember what our past was. So if you take a look in Joshua chapter 3, I want to read all of this passage of Scripture, or all of Joshua chapter 3, and the beginning of Joshua chapter 4. It's a little bit long, but I want to read it because I want you to get the essence of what's happening with God's chosen people here. This is the account of Israel preparing to go into the promised land. You remember, for about 4 decades after God delivered them and they were set free, 4 decades about, they wandered in the wilderness. And it was in this time that God's people began to murmur, they began to argue, and there was even a point of time that they said, let's just give up and let's go back to Egypt. They forgot about what God had done for them. And they said, let's forget about this quest for freedom. Let's forget about this land that God is giving to us, the promised land, and where God is. And they said, let's go back to the bondage of slavery. Let's go back to doing whatever Pharaoh imprisons us to do. And so let's take a look as they get ready to cross the Jordan in Joshua chapter 3. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark, and don't go near it. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priest, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up, and they went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all of Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan waters, go and stand in the river. Joshua said to the Israelites, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Gigarites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all of the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. As soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zaron, while the water flowing down to the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priest who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all of Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. And listen to this. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and to carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. There are a few times in the Old Testament that we see God telling his people, I want you to make a memorial. And every time that God asked his people to make a memorial, it was in that God said, I want you to remember something. There is something that is going on here that you must remember, and you must pass that on to those who come after you. And we have a memorial set before us tomorrow called Memorial Day that has been set aside for us to remember all of those who sacrificed their life so that we would be able to enjoy the freedoms that we have as a country. It is very important for us to remember those people. Just as it was very important for God to tell his people to make a memorial so that you would remember what God did for you and how he stopped the waters and your people were able to get into the land that he had promised to us. God said, set up a memorial for this occasion. Why does God do that? Why were memorials so important to God? That he said, this is what you have to do so that you were able to pass it on to generation and generation. Because God knew that his people were forgetful people. Because God knew that the Israelites were forgetful people. And God knew that if they did not have a memorial, that it was possible some years down the road that they would forget to tell the generations that followed after them that God stopped the flow of water. And God's people again are able to cross to the other side on dry ground. God knew that his people were forgetful people. Now, these were not people that did not see the miracles of God. They did see God's miracles. They did see God at work. They saw the plagues that were thrown at Pharaoh whenever they would not let God's people go. They saw God feed them when there was nothing in the desert. You remember the scriptures tell us that their clothes, while they were on this journey in the wilderness, their clothes didn't even wear out. They saw the presence of God that came. They saw miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle performed. But God still said, I want you to make a memorial. Because it is important for all of the generations that come after you to come back and to remember this moment of what God did in their life. It is equally important for us as a country to make memorials that we are able to say to generation after generation, this is what happened in the life of our country. And these are men and women who gave up so much, some even surrendering their lives, so that we are able to have the freedoms that we have. And that's why it is as equally important for us to, when we see the flag and when we hear our national anthem, to stand and respect all of those who have surrendered and paid a great price. You see, we, much like God's people, are forgetful people. We forget. And if we don't have memorials, and if we don't have days like Memorial Day, then we forget all of those who have served and paid a great price. And so today, for just a few minutes, I want us to go back in history. And I want to take a look at some of the things that happened in history that led us up to this weekend today. Do you know who this person is? You may not know who he is just in looking at the picture. This is William Bradford. William Bradford came over on the Mayflower. And after William Bradford arrived in this country, he became the second governor to the Commonwealth of Virginia. He was one of the authors of the Mayflower Compact that was authored in the year 1620. And this is a portion of what was in the Mayflower Compact. I just want to read it to you. Having undertaken for the glory of God and advancements of the Christian faith and in honor of our king and country, this voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these present solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and in one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civic body policy. The main purposes here in this compact is the glory of God and to advance the Christian faith. Did you catch that? Those who came to advance the Christian faith. Men and families here, not to be free from religion, but to freely pursue their faith in God the Almighty. Their journey was to advance the Christian faith. Those who arrived here in this country first. Let me read to you an excerpt of a document that came about 150, a little more than that, so years later, called the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that are among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the restitute of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. From the beginning of our country, before it was a country, God was at the center. And there have been memorials that have been established in the life of our nation to remind us that God was at the center. And our responsibility as followers of Christ is to go back to those memorials and remind the generations that come after us that from the beginning, from the early stages, from the foundation, God was at the center. In the same way that God said, build a memorial to the Israelites in Joshua chapter 3 and in Joshua chapter 4, that God did something special, that God was at the center of their journey. We too have to have memorials reminding us of the things that our country has experienced in the past. And we must stand up when those memorials are being torn down, when those memorials are being desecrated, and when those memorials are being destroyed. We have the responsibility and the obligation to stand up and say, stop. That is our history. And those memorials stand to do one of two things. One, remind us that that's a history we don't want to go back to. And two, to remind us that there are men and women that sacrificed to give us the freedoms, and so we celebrate those things that we now have. And we must experience those memorials and pass them down to generation to generation. We could go on and talk about the memorials that we have as a nation, and they're all around our country. One that every one of us carry. It's green and it's in our pocket, or it's silver or brown, and we carry it in our pockets or in our purse. It's money. And on our money, they were so careful to print a few words that we must proclaim as a memorial, not just for us, but for our country and the generations to come. And those few words are, in God we trust. That's not just a motto. That was how our founders lived. That is why our founders got on boats to come here, because it was in God they trusted. And those are memorials that were very, very important for us. But now, standing in 2018 and looking back, we see a country that is forgotten. We've built memorials, and we've walked away from those memorials. We've allowed those memorials to be torn down. We've allowed those memorials and what they stand for to be destroyed. But in looking back, we've got a choice. And the choice for us, the choice for us is to continue walking in the desecration of those memorials, or to stand up and say, stop. We have to remember where we came from if we want to get a place of commonality and unity in the future. It is important for us as a church to stand up, because if we as a church don't stand up, then chances are nobody else will. We have to stand up for our country. But today we live in a time where individual choice and individual freedoms becomes more important than the freedoms that so many fought and so many died for. We're in a time where the individual is more important than the country. And we see so much divide and so much disunity, and we see so many people fighting against each other. When Jesus said, we should be as one, and if unity doesn't begin with us in the church, then it will never be in our country. We cannot forget our history. We cannot forget who we are. We cannot forget where we came from, the good and the bad. We cannot forget the United States of America and the foundations upon which she was built. Because if we do, then the liberty that we experience and the freedoms that we enjoy will continue to erode. The freedoms of America cannot be maintained apart from the people and the God in which those people serve. It's not just my opinion, but it's the opinion of our founding fathers. It's the opinion of our early documents that we have as a country. It's opinion of this great country. John Adams, who was our second president, in a military address on October 11th, 1798, said these words, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Alexis de Tocqueville was a French philosopher. He came to America in the early 1800s to see what all of this fuss was about in this new country. And he came so that he would be able to experience it. And this is what he said. "I sought for the key to the greatness and genius of America in her harbors, in her fields and in her forest, in her rich mines and a vast world of commerce, in her public school system and in the institutions of learning. I sought for it in her democratic Congress and in her matchless Constitution. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits flame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will never cease to be great." It is important for us as followers of Christ to remember our foundation, to build memorials to it and celebrate those memorials and continue to live for the glory of God. But you see, just as French philosophers and just as our early presidents and the early governors and rulers of this country have said, America will only be as great as the churches stand up for the freedoms and the Word of God. And when we rest on our laurels and when we stop fighting for the freedoms, then we as a church may as well give up and surrender our country to those who wish to destroy it. We have an obligation, church. We have an obligation not only to the freedoms that we discover in Christ, but to our country as well. Our foundation of this country is worth fighting for. Our foundation is worth dying for. And there are so many that have died for it. And we recognize them tomorrow on Memorial Day. I want to show you a short video. It's actually from the movie We Were Soldiers. It's a good movie to watch tomorrow during Memorial Day. But this is just a short clip towards the end of the movie when one of the soldiers is actually coming home and his family's not aware of that. So let me share this with you. Almost countless people have fought and given of themselves, many paying the ultimate sacrifice. These soldiers' stories have become our story. It's not just their story, it's our story. Because their blood was shed for each one of us. Though we might not comprehend their experience and we may not know all that they went through, their story is still our story. Because their story fought for each one of us. And who knows the fate of our country had they not stood in the gap and had they not paid the ultimate sacrifice. Tomorrow, let's build a memorial and pass it on to generation after generation as a reminder of those who fought and died for us and gave all that they had to give. But if we go back a little further, we see someone who gave themselves for us, and that was Jesus Christ. There's so many people that we stand up on the backs of where we're at today at the end of May in 2018. We stand up on the backs of those who gave their lives for the freedom that we have in this country. And we stand on the back of so many people that have given their lives so that the message of the cross of Christ will go on and be passed for generation to generation. And we stand upon the victory that we find in Calvary's bloodshed of Jesus Christ. And so this morning, we're going to end our service with communion because we remember as a memorial of what Christ passed on to us to continue passing to generation, to remember the body of Christ and the blood of Christ that was so freely given for us. You see, communion is in itself a memorial. And that's part of why Christ said, this communion, do in remembrance of him. So that we take this as a memorial and pass it down from generation to generation to generation. To remember what Christ did for us when he paid the ultimate sacrifice so that our soul could find freedom and liberty in him that we would never be able to find anywhere else. And so this morning we would welcome you to the Lord's table. It's not our table, it's a table that he invited you to. And so if you have a relationship with Christ, we invite you to this table to take the bread and to take the cup. We'll all come down the center aisle, and then I ask you to just return and be seated at your seat, holding onto the cup and holding onto the bread, and then we will partake of those elements together.